Television Network.
Deadly fighting erupts between rival factions of South Sudan Vice President Machar's party. The U.S. blacklists 5 terrorist leaders in Africa. And the Taliban captures second provincial capital in 24 hours. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Here are more stories making headlines. The UN warns that around 4.4 million people in Nigeria at risk of critical food shortages. And Kenyan students tell us what they gained from their studies in China. We begin in South Sudan, where deadly fighting has erupted between rival factions in the party led by Vice President Riek Machar. Machar's military spokesperson says that the conflict began when rivals dethroned Machar's party head. Spokesman Colonel Lam Paul Gabriel added that 2 major generals and 27 enemy soldiers had been killed. Rival general of the SPLA-IO party, Simon Gatwich, has not commented on the issue. Leaders from the Sudan People's Liberation Army in opposition say they deposed Machar for failing to represent their interests in government. Machar, on the other hand, has dismissed the declaration, saying it's a failed coup. Machar has been in a power-sharing deal with President Salva Kiir since 2018. Well, let's shift our focus to Nigeria now, where the United Nations is warning of an impending famine on the country's northeast. It says that millions of people in the region are at risk of going hungry, mostly due to insecurity posed by the terror group Boko Haram. CGTN's Tesem Akende reports.
55-year-old Sarat Johanna works in the outskirts of Jos, north-central Nigeria. She tills people's farms for little money so as to earn her living. She lost one of her 7 children and was displaced from her home in Borno State, hundreds of miles away by an insurgency in 2014.
The memories are not good at all. Feeding was never a problem. I was farming and the yield was good. From it, we sold and paid the school fees of our children. But now we are displaced. I either help till people's farms for a small token or do other menial jobs to survive with my children.
The United Nations World Food Programme says 8.6 million people are facing food shortages in Nigeria's northeast alone, and many of them can't cultivate their farms due to an insurgency. It also says that nearly 350,000 people have died in the violence and over 2 million have been displaced internally. At least 76 rice farmers were killed in Borno State by suspected Boko Haram members in November last year. The WFP goes on to say that 300,000 children are suffering from acute malnutrition, while 4.3 million people rely entirely on food assistance in Nigeria. Experts say the government needs to do more to address the situation.
We all know that the bulk of food that is consumed in urban area is produced from the rural area. Now, the guys that are involved actively in these sectors have been forced to leave their ancestral home. Right now, they are living in the mega cities. So government have to, be up and doing to make sure that insecurity is defeated so that people can go back to their ancestral land to start all over what has been their major activities, which is farming.
Nigeria also faces the challenge of the COVID-19 pandemic and climate change. Last year, the International Committee of the Red Cross said more than 25,000 Nigerians were displaced by flooding in several parts of the country. The government says it is trying to address the problems. In June, President Muhammadu Buhari visited troops in Borno State, the epicenter of the insurgency in the country, where he gave them marching orders to end the war. He also launched a humanitarian project including 10,000 housing units, power plants, and agricultural schemes that will help alleviate the suffering of victims there. And millions of internally displaced people like Saratu hope these efforts will yield results so that they can return to their ancestral lands to farm and live better lives. Tesem Akende, CGTN Jos, Nigeria.
The United Nations says a ceasefire in Tigray and humanitarian humanitarian grounds is needed now more than ever if a massive aid operation across front lines is to succeed. Earlier this week, the UN official warned that about 200,000 people had been displaced by fighting in neighboring Amhara region, along with more than 50,000 in Afar. CGTN's Enoch Sekolia reports.
Speaking in Geneva, the United Nations Emergency Relief Chief, Martin Griffiths, highlighted the urgency of the situation in the northern Ethiopian region. Many people are in dire need of humanitarian aid and assistance after months of fighting between government forces and those loyal to the Tigray People's Liberation Front, known as TPLF.
This war has to stop. This war has to end. We will, all of us, continue to try to make sure that those 100 trucks a day reach Mekelle, reach the beneficiaries. We will do everything we can to help the people affected in Amhara and Afar, while continuing the work in other parts of Ethiopia.
Griffiths also highlighted the logistical challenge of negotiating aid access into Tigray while violence in the area continues.
The Prime Minister has this unilateral ceasefire. He repeated his commitment to it twice on the two occasions we met. And I have no reason to doubt that at all. For the Tigrayans, who are extending the war into the south and east, into Afar and Amhara, they need to take into account that without that ceasefire, we will try to get those 100 trucks in, and we'll do everything we can. But it's going to be easier for the Tigrayan people if the war will stop.
Since conflict erupted last November, humanitarian needs have grown, and the UN has warned that the fighting could lead to famine in the region.
They need food. The harvest, which is recently being planted, is likely only to produce between a quarter and maximum a half of its likely production. So the need for food is going to go right through until next year.
The UN also confirmed about 178 aid trucks have reached Tigray's regional capital, Mekelle. Another 40 are expected to arrive soon. The agency says that the Ethiopian government is very keen in helping out in the humanitarian aid delivery efforts and the protection of civilians. Enoch Sekolia, CGTN.
The Afghan war is in a more destructive and deadlier phase as the Taliban takes provincial capitals. More cities like Herat, Kandahar, and Lashkar-Gah are under pressure as Afghan security forces try and retain control. They also captured a prison in northern Afghanistan and released the prisoners in another blow to the country's law and order.
As the Taliban tighten their control in many rural provinces, Russia's air force is patrolling near Afghanistan's northern border. Fighter jets are conducting joint maneuvers with Uzbekistan as both countries are worried about the worsening security situation. The city of Saranj in southern Nimroz province fell on Friday, despite the Afghan government's claim that they're still resisting. These pictures, posted by Taliban fighters, appear to show them in control. Afghan officials are also targeted by the Taliban. The government's head of media and information was assassinated in the capital city, Kabul, on Friday. It's another aspect of how the country is being destabilized and weakened despite an ongoing peace process. Afghanistan's Western-backed president was at the funeral.
They fill coffins with young people. This isn't humanity. We stand for humanity, life and dignity of Afghanistan, and this is our wish.
Dozens of bureaucrats, civil servants, judges, journalists and social activists have been killed by Taliban fighters recently. They want to install a hardline Islamic leadership instead of the democratically elected, more liberal Muslim government. Local fighters are being called up to support the Afghan army and security forces to try and defend cities like here in Herat. At the United Nations, diplomats are reminded what's at stake.
You cannot terrorize the population on the one hand, unleash a massive attack on cities, and then go to Doha and talk about peace on the other hand.
Hundreds of travelers are stranded on the Pakistan-Afghan border after the Taliban grabbed control of the Spin Boldak crossing point near Kandahar last month. It's now closed for people and commercial traffic. In many other areas, thousands of families are displaced as more flee Taliban attacks. Makeshift camps are home to almost 350,000 Afghans, refugees in their own country as the fighting intensifies. Yolo David, CGTN.
Well, catching up with the latest on wildfires in Greece and Turkey now. On the 11th day of the catastrophic inferno, helicopters and planes are still hovering over Turkey. The aircrafts are battling to put out blazes that have so far claimed 8 lives and destroyed tens of thousands of hectares of forest cover in Turkey's Aegean province. President Tayyip Erdogan has described the wildfires as the country's worst ever. Both residents and tourists are fleeing the province. Authorities say the planes arrived in Turkey on Monday. However, strong winds and hot temperatures above 40 degrees are contributing to faster spread of the fires.
Thousands of residents and tourists were evacuated in the early hours of Saturday as wildfires continued to burn across Greece for the 6th day, reaching the outskirts of the Greek capital. Authorities are urging people who live in the city to avoid unnecessary travel, to keep their windows shut, and to always wear masks. A fire threatening the Greek capital's most important national park killed 1 volunteer firefighter, while at least 20 people have so far been injured in blazes during the country's worst heat wave in 30 years. The fires that started near Mount Parnitha on Tuesday continued to burn and quickly spread to nearby urban areas, such as Krioneri, Drosopigi, and Aphidnes, before reaching Aio Stefano, an industrial zone. Many houses and properties have been burned, and many animals have been killed.
We are very sad, because it's not just about us. There are thousands of people who lost their homes, their fortunes, and we are so sad. Now that over there, it's dangerous for us. We came now, but who knows, we might have to leave again.
In apocalyptic scenes overnight, ferries evacuated more than 1,000 people from a seaside village and beaches on the island of Evia. After flames cut off all other means of escape, older adults had to be assisted as they boarded ferries to safety. The multiple fires have stretched Greece's firefighting forces to the limit. The government has received help from France, Ukraine, Cyprus, Croatia, Sweden, and Israel, with more expected to arrive on Saturday from Romania and Switzerland. Civil Protection Chief Nikos Kardalias said firefighters faced exceptional, dangerous, and unprecedented conditions.
As we said yesterday, this is the hardest day we are facing in terms of the intensity of the weather conditions from the last 10 days. From yesterday afternoon, a number of new fires were added to the many fronts we have across the country. Right now, we have 56 fires that we are fighting.
In the last 24 hours, the fire brigade has tackled close to 90 wildfires, including ancient Olympia, site of the original Olympic Games, Evia, Messenia, and here, north of the Greek capital. With wildfires seemingly everywhere, locals say it almost feels like their country is under attack. Evangelos Sipsas for CGTN, Athens, Greece.
The U.S. State Department has added 5 alleged senior members of jihadist groups in Africa to its terror blacklist. The new list includes Bonamade Machude Omar, the senior commander of ISIS Mozambique, Mohammed Raji, a spokesperson for terrorist group Al-Shabaab, and Mohammed Abdakir, an operations planner for the same group. 2 senior leaders from the Mali-based Al-Qaeda branch, Jama'at Nasir al-Islam wal-Muslimin, namely Sudan al-Hita and Salam ul-Brahmat, are also on the list. The State Department listing will freeze any assets the individuals may have in the United States and makes it a crime to assist them. Well, time for us to take a short break, but still ahead on Africa Live. Kenyan students tell us what they gained from their studies in China. And Tunisian activists want people with disabilities to be given priority in the ongoing COVID-19 vaccinations.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography. And a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. we are at the heart of the continent. To bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Jihadist,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. Well, Kenyans who studied in China say that they have gained immense technical skills, knowledge, and enthusiasm that will play constructive roles in Kenya's development efforts. They say that the people-to-people ties between Nairobi and Beijing are bearing fruit. CGTN's Enoch Sekolia met some of them and now reports.
It's moving really fast. My name is Grace Kyoko, and I studied in Beijing from 2016 to 2019 July. Yeah, and I was at the Institute of Zoology in Beijing under Professor Li Shuqiang. And yeah, so I did actually biodiversity of spiders.
Grace Kyoko was busy capturing spiders when we arrived at the National Museum of Kenya's Zoo Gardens.
You can find, as you see in the webs, you can see the webs, mostly in crevices. Spiders occupy literally every habitat, from caves to ground.
She says her knowledge about spiders improved a great deal after undertaking a master's degree in China, and she believes the Chinese eating style has also played a big role in her trade.
Especially the use of the chopsticks for one, because when you're catching spiders, they move quite very fast. So the fact that you're used to using the chopsticks, it kind of stabilizes your hand. For me, that worked for me, because when you're catching like a spider, it runs off, so you have to move very fast to catch it before it runs away.
Since 2015, China has provided around 67,000 training opportunities for Kenya, according to the Chinese embassy in Kenya. In 2019, a total of 2,400 Kenyan students were enrolled in Chinese learning institutions, and more Kenyans are seeking higher education opportunities in China, which has become the destination most favored by African students. The relations between China and Kenya has been on an upward spiral, and for Kenyans who schooled in the Far East country, the benefits can only be mutual and far-reaching.
My name is Vivian Kadhambi. I am a plant botanist, a plant scientist, yeah. I do conservation that involves the collection, preservation, and the documentation, as well as educating people about the importance of plants and them conserving them. I went to China through a Kenyan-Chinese collaboration called Sajorek. They had a collaboration between Kenyan students and the Chinese to improve on the biodiversity of Kenya. Because in China, the biodiversity is huge, and to get to interact with plant scientists who have worked for so long, getting to know the tips on how to easily identify plants, to engage in the natural walks and the ecosystems, it was interesting, as we did our fieldwork both in China and in Kenya.
My name is Dr. Mbuni Juvenalis. I work in the National Museums of Kenya as the botanic garden manager. When I went to China in studying in Wuhan Botanical Garden, I realized that the garden is well maintained, of which I've tried to bring back at home, whereby comfortably now I can be able to say that many and more visitors have come back in visiting our garden in terms of education, in terms of research.
Outside the classroom, Kenyan students in China also have a unique opportunity to learn more about the whole of Chinese society. They live with the Chinese, go to Chinese restaurants, and visit shopping malls. These interactions make them have a deeper understanding of the meteoric transformation of Chinese society.
I like the transport system. because it's regulated by the government, for one, so it's relatively cheap to move around. And they actually obey most of the traffic laws and everything. So it was quite interesting, despite the fact that it's really crowded in the subway and in the buses, but the transport system is really efficient.
Grace Kyoko believes that it will be good if Kenya and other African countries borrow a leaf from China. Enoch Sikolia, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
A Tunisian organization lobbying for the rights of people with disabilities wants them to be given priority in the ongoing COVID-19 vaccinations. Their calls come amid the surge in infections and deaths in that country. The activists have denounced what they say is the marginalization of people with disabilities since the outbreak. Here's Adnan Shiwashi with more details from Tunis.
Civil society activists have urged the state to launch a COVID-19 sensitization campaign targeting people with disabilities and to step up the vaccination of the handicapped throughout the country.
We have noticed that the national coronavirus media sensitization campaign does not refer to people with disabilities. The online vaccination platform is complicated and inaccessible for the handicapped. There should be a special section to facilitate our registration for vaccination. We cannot have real data without registering all people with disabilities.
Fighting the coronavirus pandemic is the responsibility of all Tunisians. The handicapped should not be excluded from the national strategy. We have invited experts to explain the importance of the different vaccines for people living with different disabilities, as well as side effects and the means of protection.
The Association for the Defense of the Blind and Visually Impaired Individuals called on the Health Ministry to encourage students with disabilities to get vaccinated so as to allow the resumption of learning in September.
The vaccination is vital for any disabled person. We're already living a difficult life. Protecting us is the state's responsibility. We have been ignored. Now, we must be vaccinated as soon as possible.
Dr. Jalila Ben Khalil is the spokesperson for Tunisia's scientific committee to combat the coronavirus. The expert believes that all people with disabilities in the country could get inoculated in the next 6 weeks.
The national vaccination strategy does not exclude any Tunisian citizen. Now that vaccines are available, the people with disabilities will be given priority. Our role as a scientific committee is to give a voice to the voiceless and defend their cause at the health department.
The Health Ministry and the Social Affairs Department plan to give priority in vaccinations to people with disabilities, particularly those from specialized centers and protection centers. This vaccination strategy will also include centers for the blind and athletes with disabilities.
According to the National Institute of Statistics, there are more than 152,000 disabled people in Tunisia who are facing many challenges every day. Experts assert that the vaccination of disabled people will allow them to resume a normal life instead of staying at home amid the pandemic. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Time now for a short break and return your sport news, including the latest from the Olympics.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 14 hours of rain.
Africans made a mark on the medal standings of the penultimate day of the Tokyo 2020 Games, although Olympic glory eluded them in Saturday's track and field program. Kenya's Timothy Chariot took silver in the men's 1,500 meters final behind Norwegian Jakob Ingebrigtsen, who won in an Olympics record of 3 minutes 28.32 seconds. World record holder Letesenbet Gidey of Ethiopia ran out of